Hello, everybody. Welcome to TMI Live number 51, ToC, etc. I don't know, I had to call it something. I wasn't going to do a live broadcast this week. At least I wasn't planning on it. Hey, John. Hey, S. Alfonso Williams. I wasn't necessarily going to do one this week because I've started doing my course, but it's not quite as insane as I feared, so I have a little bit of time to play with, and I thought I'd check in with you all. Anyway, it's Tuesday night. It's 9 p.m. or just after Eastern, and I am in the library of Eric McLuhan, as I try to be at least one night a week. However, this night I am not cataloging books so much as reading books. So I'm not even giving a pretense of adding to my inventory this week. I'm just straight up reading and studying for the course I mentioned. So last Saturday was class 1 of 12, and it went really well. 3 hours, incredibly. I talked for. I ended up having a lot more material than I could get through, which kind of was on purpose because I had this fear that I would get an hour through and I'd be through all my material and would have nothing to say. So I over-prepared stuff to talk about, which is fine, except I actually did want to get through all that stuff. So I'm going to play catch up a little bit. I'm using this thing because I've left my usual rig down at the satellite office. The McLuhan Institute satellite, speaking of which, pop up in the location in Wellington, Ontario, is basically closed now. It was a great experiment. I call it a success. I didn't have a ton of visitors, but hey, who wants a ton of random strangers in close quarters right now? Not really me. So that was fine. I learned a lot. I'm glad I did it. And now I'm hanging on to the space because it has high-speed internet, and I'm delivering my course from there. So I wish I could be doing the course from here, obviously. This place has a particular vibe, and, books and all the rest of it, artifacts. But what it doesn't have is a solid internet connection. So every week I stream off my phone data to make it work. So a couple things I might mention. I guess my first class at is the class cost per lecture for? Oh, it's for the entire course. Yeah, no, that's not per lecture. I think you can probably still jump in if you want to. I don't know if they'll prorate it or anything, but check out, if you go to the McLuhanInstitute.com, there's a link there to Gray Area into the class, which is called UMI, Understanding Media Intensive. The first class was great. It was mostly just introductions. What we're doing, if you don't know, is we're studying the first half dozen or so chapters of Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. And for the first class, before I started teaching the actual book, I wanted to give a bit of background. So I talked about myself, and I talked about my dad, Eric, and I talked about my grandfather, Marshall, who wrote the book, just to place myself, where I come from, the author, in the context of lives and environments, to give a background and help people understand where this book is coming from, and the sorts of things that went into the writing of it. For example, in 1960, Marshall was hired to write a syllabus for high school students on understanding media. He delivered a report on the project in Understanding New Media, as it was called, and 4 years later came out with this book. So I think it's helpful to understand the book, to understand where it came from. My focus on teaching the course is on the first half a dozen, 7 chapters, which are the real practical parts of the book. the later chapters are all sort of close case studies of particular technologies using a lot of the tools outlined in the first part of the book. So that's my aim. One thing I didn't get a chance to bring up in the first class, which I wanted to, is this book, Theories of Communication, and an article, essay Eric McLuhan wrote for it called Marshall McLuhan's Theory of Communication, the YEGG, Y-E-G-G. YEGG is a 100 or so year old word for a safecracker, someone who, in the early 20th century, maybe even 19th century, would, place something against a safe and turn the dials and listen for the clicks and stuff and break into a safe. Eric's chapter on his father's theory of communication is amazing. It's this is an expensive book, but it's worth the price if you're interested in McLuhan work, because Dad really goes deeply into Marshall's theory of communication. He starts off by stating that Marshall insisted he didn't have. He says, "Look, I don't have a theory of communication. I don't use theories. I just watch what people do, what you do," or words to that effect. That's the short answer to our question. What is Marshall McLuhan's theory of communication? Perhaps I should end the chapter here. The long answer follows, and it's worth the long answer. The premise of the book is a project that Marshall and Eric started together. I think Marshall started it long before, but they worked on it together, on determining people's theories of communication. As Eric says in the introduction, a fundamental principle of this book is that communication entails change. No change, no communication. He says this approach is rhetoric to the core, as is, the McLuhan approach to understanding, to looking at media. It's rhetoric to the core. It's concerned with effect. And as Marshall and Eric detail, to find out somebody's theory of communication, you ask two things. What is the author's intended audience, and what is their intended effect? Audience plus effect equals theory of communication. That's basically it. And Marshall goes through, this was one thing. I do a lot of work on Marshall and now Eric's libraries, and a lot of that work has to do with their annotation and their short forms. One of those short forms is T, capital T, small o, capital C, which stands for Table of Contents, but it also stands for Theory of Communication. And in Marshall and Eric's work, when in the margins they write ToC, they're highlighting information leading to this person's theory of communication. So whether it has to do with their audience or it has to do with their intended effect, that's what they're flagging. This book contains, and that's put out by Peter Lang, and I guess I'm promoting their material, but hey, a whole bunch of chapters. Marshall looks at Wyndham Lewis, Formal Causality in Chesterton, Francis Bacon's Theory of Communication, that one's by Eric. Pound, Eliot in the Rhetoric of the Wasteland, Thomas Aquinas by Eric. Some stuff on Eliot. Leavis and Richards, Joyce. Oh yeah, Chapter 9, Joyce and McLuhan, I've talked about before in an earlier episode of this series, is well worth looking at. Talking about Marshall McLuhan's relationship with James Joyce and James Joyce's work. What else? Paradox in Chesterton, Bias of Communication. Right, Marshall wrote an introduction to Innes's Bias of Communication, etc., etc. There's Aristotle, Cicero, on mimesis, on formal cause. Oh, this has a copy of On Formal Cause, which is the essay that leads off. Do I have it right here? Yeah. Another book Eric put out, Media in Formal Cause. This is by Neopoiesis Press. And this is also a really cool book to pick up. I have it's video, but it's audio, 20 minutes, almost half an hour on the YouTube channel of Eric McLuhan talking about formal cause, which is a good intro. This is a heavy book. Both of these are very scholarly, kind of written for academic audiences. There's a good question. Intended audience and effective medium formal cause. I'm not going to go into that. Anyway, for my next class, UMI number 2, I'm going to be talking about theories of communication, and also the first 2 introductions Marshall wrote for Understanding Media, which are in this. We're using this copy, the most recent edition of Understanding Media, Ginkgo Press 2003, just as a control, so we can all be on the same page. But also because it has both of the introductions as well as some cool supplementary material at the end. So it's a good edition to have. And this is the edition I'm using. So we'll go through the 2 introductions. And also, I have an introduction that Eric McLuhan wrote in 2003 called Forward is Forearmed. And he wrote an introduction to Understanding Media when he was supposed to be the editor. This is edited by Terence Gordon. Eric McLuhan was originally the editor, and I don't know exactly what happened, but didn't end up finishing the job. But he did write an introduction, which I'm using in this class. So next week is further introductions, and then onward to the 7 chapters, the meat. So I guess I'll probably be back next week and maybe talk about what we did last week in the class. And if you're interested in taking the class, like I said, it's possibly not too late to jump in on that. So check it out. And thanks for being here. Take care, everybody. Good night.